Welcome back to Indus News live from our studios in Lahore. I'm Usman Lone. Well, we start from India, where at least 70 people have died because of a 45-degree heat wave in the eastern state of Bihar. Over 30 patients are still undergoing treatment. The worst hit district is Aurangabad, where some 30 people have died so far. 20 people have died in Gaya and 10 in Nawada district. The situation has been worsened by an acute water and power crisis. Most South Asian countries, including Pakistan and Bangladesh, have been struck by heat waves this summer. Now, in Sudan, ex-President Omar al-Bashir has been formally charged with corruption-related offences during his first trial since his ousting in April. Bashir was charged with incitement and involvement in the killing of protesters. Sudan's former president appeared in public for the first time since he was removed by a military coup. The chief prosecutor says corruption cases have been opened against 41 other former officials of Bashir's administration. Russia has warned against baseless accusations leveled at Iran over attacks on commercial oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman. The Kremlin called for a calm appraisal of the situation until there's more evidence. Saudi Arabia and the US blame Iran for the attacks in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's busiest oil shipping routes. But US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Tehran's involvement in last week's attack is unmistakable and says the oil tanker attacks are proof of Iranian intent to restrict shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the European Union has reaffirmed its support for Iran's 2015 nuclear deal and a new payment mechanism to circumvent US sanctions. It says the deal was delivering on its main goal of preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons. The INSTEX payments channel set up by France, Britain and Germany helps non-dollar and non-oil trade with Tehran. Iran mainly exports saffron and vehicle parts to EU member states. The pact's status has been precarious since the US withdrew last year and toughened its sanctions on Tehran. Now, Yemen's Houthi rebels have launched a fresh drone attack on Aba airport in southern Saudi Arabia. It comes after the Saudi-led coalition hit rebel positions in Yemen, following multiple drone attacks on two Saudi airports in Jazan and Aba. Yemeni Houthi rebels and the Saudi-led coalition have been engaged in tit-for-tat attacks since last week. The situation worsened when Houthi airstrikes wounded 26 people at the same airport just last Wednesday. Now, Pakistan has long been a frontline country in the fight against terrorism, and it's sacrificed thousands of lives and economically suffered the loss of billions of dollars fighting terrorism, mostly triggered by insurgents from its western border with Afghanistan. Now, after multiple military operations and millions of people displaced and repatriated, peace has finally been restored to the border areas of North Waziristan in the country's northwest. Pakistan's armed forces, in collaboration with local authorities, are now taking measures to ensure that peace lasts and normal life begins to resume in those areas. Well, let's go live now to our North Waziristan correspondent Sumaira Khan, who tells us more. Sumaira, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us about the history of this area and what it's been through and what's brought back peace there?
Yes, I must tell you first about North Waziristan that this particular agency which is now part of the tribal system, but the entire tribal system is now part of Pakistan. And first it was FCR which was implemented in these 7 agencies, and amongst these 7 agencies, North Waziristan is one of them. So first of all, we used to call it North Waziristan Agency, but since after the merger of the entire belt into province, now it's North Waziristan district of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So the merger process is right now underway. And right now there is obviously quite complications linked to that merger process as well. But the area is quite vibrant in its history. It's a hardcore tribal area that was earlier handled by the tribal elders, and there was entirely a different system in place. There was no judiciary system that was linked to the other parts of the country, and so there was altogether a different system that we used to call it a tribal system and jirga system. So now everything is changing gradually, but the agency's dynamics and other linked complicated matters, they still need to be resolved, as the local administration is trying to curtail the both systems right now at the same time, parallel systems. But I think this seems to be difficult for the local administration as of now.
Sumaira, what steps have been taken to repatriate the population? I mean, you've been here in the past. Have you noticed anything different there now?
Yes, there is a drastic difference. I must mention one thing, that before the army, the military operation took place in the area back in 2014. In particularly, if I talk about North Waziristan, the major military operation took place in June 2014, in which there was a large number of tribally displaced persons. And the term used for them was TDPs, and they were relocated in other parts of the country. Primarily, they were relocated in Banu area, and that camp was called Baka Khel camp. Right now, the situation is quite different in here. The law and order situation is much better. Normalcy is here. We cannot see any more terrorist outfits, and we did not see in the entire in the whole visit. We didn't come across any terrorist hideout, or you can say that any because before prior to the military operation in this area, there was a general perception that the area is totally being controlled by the militant elements, and obviously one of the militant elements was Pakistan, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan at that time. But now we can say that with all the satisfaction after visiting the vicinity, the people are coming back to the area.
I see.
They are living a normal life. They have their bazaars, they have their markets, and they have their homes rebuilt by the security forces and local administration and earlier FATA Secretariat. So the number of TDPs was in millions earlier, but now...
So, I mean, what lays ahead for these people that are returned back to normal life in North Waziristan? Will there remain peace in that region now?
Yes, I think it's up to the mark. If we talk about some percentages and how we rate the normalcy in the area, then it's, I think, much better, beyond our satisfaction. People are satisfied here. I have interviewed them. I talked to women. I have talked to children. I have talked to tribal elders. They are much satisfied, and I think they want this normalcy of peace to be curtailed by the local authorities, and they want them to have their focus on basic health, education, and water supply projects, because the main problem, one of the major problems of this area is obviously supply of clean water to the local population. So I think now the focus has been shifted to other things, and that is very satisfactory, I must tell you, Usman. That first of all, when I was visiting this area some years before, back in 2014, 15 and 16, people used to talk about militancy.
Thank you, Sumaira. That was Sumaira Khan there, our news correspondent in Miran Shah in North Waziristan. Well, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has inaugurated a new settlement in the occupied Golan Heights in honor of US President Donald Trump. Netanyahu unveiled a Trump Heights sign to mark the site of the new settlement. The ceremony comes 3 months after Trump recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, seized from Syria in the 1967 war. Israel later annexed the area in a move never recognized by the international community. The construction in the area is planned to be occupied by 4 settler families. Now, staying with the Israeli Prime Minister, and his wife seems to have been convicted of corruption under a plea bargain, but carries no jail time. Under the deal, the First Lady of Israel will pay a $15,000 fine for misusing state funds. While the ruling party cut short a high-profile trial, the Netanyahu family legal troubles are not over, because Prime Minister Netanyahu himself faces possible indictment for bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Now, at least 10 people have been killed by fires engulfing wheat fields in Syria's northeastern Hasakeh province. War monitors say civilians and members of the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces were among the victims. Kurdish authorities claim the fires were set deliberately. The Kurds and the Damascus regime are competing to buy up this year's harvest. But fires, some claim by ISIS, are destroying crops in the country's breadbasket. The Kurdish Agricultural Authority says the largest fires have ravaged over 350,000 hectares of land. Now, in Britain, contenders to replace Theresa May have clashed over delivering Brexit. During a live TV debate, the MPs argued the prospect of a no-deal Brexit and whether a new deal could be renegotiated with the EU. Indus News has this report.
5 candidates for Prime Minister faced off in the first TV debate of a Tory leadership contest. There were differing opinions on a no-deal Brexit and how to proceed on the issue. The leadership hopefuls turned their fire on favourite Boris Johnson, who stayed notably absent. Contenders questioned Johnson's pledge to leave the EU by the end of October, no matter what.
We've been talking about Brexit for 25 minutes now, and where is Boris? If his team won't allow him out to debate with 5 pretty friendly colleagues, how's he going to fare with 27 European countries? He should be here to answer that very question.
International Development Secretary Rory Stewart called proroguing Parliament a disturbing option. He described the contest as a competition of machismo.
The fundamental issue here is that there's a competition of machismo. Everybody's saying, I'm tougher. Genuinely, every time I have this debate, everyone's like, trust me, I'm going to do it. I'm the guy. I can defeat the impossible odds. And I'm accused of being a defeatist by trying to be realistic.
Home Secretary Sajid Javid warned against delivering Brexit by thrashing democracy.
When it comes to Nigel Farage, look, I don't underestimate him as a politician. He's had great success in recent weeks, as we've seen. But delivering on something as important as Brexit should be the job of the elected government of the people.
Ex-Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab stated that it was a mistake to take the no deal off the table, whereas Environment Secretary Michael Gove assured a different deal from the EU. The final pair of candidates will be put to a vote of the 160,000 members of the Conservative Party from June 22nd.
Well, Russia says accusations that it meddled in the European Union elections are absurd. An official from the Russian Security Council says there's no convincing evidence to validate the European Union's claims. The statement comes 2 days after the EU released a report reviewing the elections. The report is the string in a latest of Western allegations accusing Russia of using online disinformation to influence voters. Moscow has repeatedly denied the claims. Early results from Guatemala's presidential election show center-left candidate Sandra Torres is leading the race. With returns from 20% of polling stations counted, the former First Lady secured over 23% of the vote so far, while conservative Alejandro Giammattei followed Torres with 15.7% of the vote. 19 candidates are competing in the race for the presidency, and if no candidate gets more than 50% in the first phase, the top 2 candidates will contest in a second round on August 11th. Nearly 800 undocumented migrants have been detained in eastern Mexico. The detention is one of the biggest swoops on illegal immigration in recent months. Mexico's National Migration Institute says the foreign nationals were found in the back of 4 trucks. Mexico has stepped up its efforts to reduce a surge of migrants heading for the United States border as part of a deal to avoid US trade tariffs. Most people caught entering the US are fleeing poverty and violence in Guatemala, Honduras and El Salvador. Now in France, the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris has held its first service since a fire devastated the Gothic landmark just 2 months ago. The blaze destroyed the roof and spire of the 800-year-old landmark. Indus News has this report.
April 15th was a day of shock and grief for the entire France to witness the embodiment of permanence of nation in flames. Notre Dame has stood tall above Paris since the 13th century. Though the fire was very destructive, early response from fighters saved the basic structure of the building. That's why within 8 weeks, the cathedral has been reopened for worshippers. A small congregation wearing hard hats attended Mass at Notre Dame. It was led by Archbishop of Paris, Michael Opitet, and held in a side chapel.
Today
it is with strong emotion that we find ourselves here celebrating the consecration of this cathedral. But we are profoundly happy to be able to celebrate the Eucharist. It is why it was built. It's also a message of hope and thanks to all those who were touched by what happened to this cathedral, which is a symbol of our France and also of its Christian roots.
Visitors were happy on the reopening of the cathedral in such a short period of time.
It is actually even a very good thing that Mass continues, because we're not going to wait to the cathedral to be rebuilt so things can start to happen again. It all makes sense to me.
French President Emmanuel Macron has set a target of 5 years for restoring the cathedral.
Well, staying in France now, and moon rocks collected during the Apollo 11 mission are on display in Paris. The exhibition comes after the 50th anniversary of the famed Apollo missions. Indus News has this report.
Usually dull grey in color, moon rocks are unremarkable in appearance, but they hold great value for planetary scientists. France has put its own share of NASA's collection at a science museum in Paris.
In 1969, France finally asked the US if we could have a permanent sample in the country. Very quickly, the US offered us these samples, which were very quickly put on display at the Palais de la Découverte, so that the public could see them as you and I do today.
Many discoveries made elsewhere in the solar system, including Mercury and Mars, are related to the study of moon rocks. New discoveries are still being made.
So what we learned from Apollo 11 is how to get to the moon. The mission worked really well from the start to finish, which is evidence in itself. It was a technical and technological demonstration to that we, or rather Americans, are able to send someone to the moon and bring them back alive and well. So this is a first discovery.
Lunar samples are being handed out this year to scientists across France for further study to mark the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission. Sending astronauts back to the moon is a goal US President Donald Trump has set for the future.
Now, a Colombian town is hoping to brew up 2 world records. One for the world's largest cup of coffee, and the second for the largest coffee tasting in the world. More in this report.
In the heart of Colombia's coffee-growing capital, the town of Chinchina is brewing up 20 tons of coffee in one giant cup. But it's not going to be easy. The town will have to wait a little longer to receive its crown. A representative from the Guinness World Record says further evidence is needed before announcing an official award.
For this first cup of coffee, a minimum of 18,012 liters of coffee is necessary. For the second, we need a minimum of 739 people that fulfill all the requirements at the time they enter the area. So there are 2 completely different requirements that need to wait a little bit because the evidence is very detailed, since we are talking about food-related records.
The event organizers say the world record attempts are an effort to promote the local coffee culture and farmers.
For this cup of coffee, a minimum of 18,012 liters of coffee is necessary. For the second, we need a minimum of 739 people that fulfill all the requirements at the time they enter the area. So there are 2 completely different records in terms of requirements that need to wait a little bit because the evidence is very detailed since we're talking about food-related records.
Colombia is the 4th largest economy in Latin America and one of the largest coffee exporters in the world.
As the violence continues in Libya, European rescue vessels are patrolling less in its coastal waters. And now, Tunisian fishermen who normally try to rescue migrants are stranded at sea. Indus News has this report.
Libyans continue to flee to Europe, hoping to escape its civil war.
It's a dangerous journey, and humanitarian assistance from Europe has dwindled. With no European rescue ships to pull shipwrecked migrants from the water, Tunisian fishing trawlers have stepped in.
The first ones to deal with migrants are the fishermen. Why? Because our fishing area is crossing point for them. When they leave Libya, heading to Lampedusa, meaning they can only reach Lampedusa by passing through our fishing area.
Fishing boat crews help in whatever way they can. Sometimes all they can do is alert the authorities. But abandoning their original mission of catching fish can come at a high price.
The loss for us is that we have to stop our work to save them and return on land with them. It's hard to finish our work. For example, we work a day or two. If we find them on the second day, we have worked one night. If we find them on the first night, we have to return with them.
The fishermen never abandon migrants in distress at sea. Those they save often say they were ignored by other vessels.
Fishermen are practically the only cops at sea who alert. Sometimes they cannot afford to take 90 people. Therefore, they alert the maritime authorities. Migrants tell us that a lot of boats are passing by on the high seas. They ask for help, but the boats pass by them and do not help. And that's a crime too.
The situation is far from ideal. Lives have been lost as a result.
They must put some ship or some boat for rescue people. In sea, we was 85 people. Is died. We survived 16 people. Others is died because of rescue boat. Wasn't help there anyone to help us.
With no end in sight for Libya's chaos, the fishermen have their work cut out for them in the near future.
Now in business news, Chinese tech giant Huawei is preparing for a 50% decline in its overseas smartphone sales. Huawei is facing pressure internationally after being blacklisted by policies introduced by US President Donald Trump. The company is expecting a drop of anywhere between 40 to 60 million smartphones this year. It's exploring several overseas options, including pulling the latest model of its flagship phone, the Honor 20. The phone will begin selling in parts of Europe on June 21st. Authorities will be monitoring the launch and may cut off shipments if sales are poor. Now it's nice and sunny in Lahore, but let's take a look around the weather around the globe. Well, that's the news for now, but don't forget, stay tuned to Indus News for further updates throughout the day.